That will be one. Good morning, everybody. Is the mic working? Yeah, now it's working. Cool. Hey, everybody. My name is Joseph. The funny thing is that probably most of the people in the room know me. For those who don't know me, I work with the Ethereum Foundation. I work on operations and kind of like liaison between ops and R&D teams. The topic I would like to talk today about is Ethereum as a self-sufficient ecosystem, and kind of just like throwing my pretty subjective view on like what sort of the baseline amount of money that the ecosystem should kind of like strive to secure for like the core development and possibly research, and like, and if it's if it's possible to get there, and like what's the actual like pathway towards an ecosystem that doesn't have to rely on like large treasuries. So today I'm going to talk about a bit about the ecosystem itself. We'll do like a little dive into the Ethereum stack and like what do I understand by the stack, and then we'll talk about like the baseline funding. So the state of the ecosystem. I mean, like as you can see, well, you know, we are in the middle of the pandemic, but there is still stuff happening. Like there are new projects, new companies, like almost every day. There are like hundreds of startups. There are like hundreds, if not thousands of people like joining the ecosystem. If you go to like any of the, the R&D channels, like the ETH research forums, if you just like watch Twitter, the ecosystem is still booming, in my opinion. Like each year, I'm just like surprised by like how easy it is to lose track with what's happening. So these are some numbers to throw out there. I kind of like try to use sources, but it's quite hard to measure. So there are like different, there are different numbers that are kind of like across like a range of like 1,000 or 10,000. But I guess like we can like a safe baseline for like how does the ecosystem look like in terms of the people participating on it, would be about like 2.5K like core developers and people interested in research. I think the E2 R&D Discord has around like 4,000 people or something. Maybe like roughly the same amount of people like participating in some of the forums. Obviously not everybody is like active day to day, but if you go to like any of the implementation calls on like the merge or statelessness and so on, you'll usually find about like, I don't know, 20, 40 people participating in these calls, and there's like obviously overlap in some of those, but those are also quite distinct groups between the individual like research topics. So based on the numbers from the like 1 million developers, there's apparently about like 200K kind of capable developers that are aware of the Ethereum stack, can use it in some way. This would be more on the application side, like where you have Solidity developers. But all of those kind of like understand the stack good enough in order for them to be able to dive kind of deeper in case they need it. Plus, apparently, there is over 3 million DeFi users. That's just the people that kind of like use the stack, and obviously DeFi is just like one of the segments. But that's quite a lot of people already. So, well, I guess the protocol is used. If we go kind of like one level deeper, well, we have like roughly 5 teams working on ETH1 clients, execution layer clients. We have roughly 5 teams working on E2 clients, the consensus layer. And we have more than 5 like L2 attempts or like research and development teams that are working on L2s and generally scaling Ethereum. Now, like 5 seems, good enough. Although if you actually look at the network distribution based on like the ETH1 client, just like network split, or like the percentage of like people running an ETH1 client, you will actually see that like most of them are relying on single team, on Get. In E2 space is not as horrible, but there's like a likelihood that will eventually happen as well. So, I mean, looks decent. There's definitely redundancy in the system, but it's like far from optimal. Speaking about companies booming in the space, there's like a lot of traction. There's like a lot of startups building the tooling, selling the picks and shovels, building like infrastructure for reading from the blockchain state. There's a whole bunch of DAOs as well. These are kind of the most interesting part of the ecosystem these days, probably. Like all of these like new concepts that didn't have to set up a company, but they just run fully on chain. But there is also like a lot of like large companies, like Fortune 500 companies having their own like blockchain teams, and I guess predominantly like interested in Ethereum. So we also have still quite a lot of money in the ecosystem. This is just a screenshot from 2 days ago from openorgs.info, David Mihal's project. That's my primary source of all of the data. Basically, within these, I don't know how many, like 15 teams, 15 DAOs mostly, there sits around like $6 billion. Kind of, I'm not saying like necessarily waiting to be spent, but potentially utilizable for securing the infrastructure itself. This doesn't account for quite a lot of companies in the space. The EF treasury is not there, obviously, as like one of the sources of funding. The old like ICO treasuries, like things like Golem, things like Aragon, the kind of stuff, that's not there as well. So probably the number is like much larger. But I guess these are the ones that wanted to open up. So yeah, there's quite a lot of money sitting in the ecosystem. Another question is like, is this enough? Like, are we fine with just the assumption that like there's a lot of money in the treasuries, therefore like the ecosystem is self-sufficient and we'll just like keep on working even though some of the initiators may like leave the ecosystem. So to answer that, we'll first have to kind of dive into what is actually kind of the base layer. Like what are the core teams? What are their funding requirements? So this is my attempt to kind of like break down, I guess, the core parts of the ecosystem, going just beyond like protocol itself into nice happy little boxes. And obviously there's much more, but I would just focus on these. So on the mainnet and protocol side, we have execution layer clients, Base, Oregon, Get, Nethermind, Open Ethereum. We also have like Nimbus and like other kind of like smaller clients, but let's just like take these into account. On the consensus layer, bunch of E2 clients, Lighthouse, Lodestar, Nimbus, Teku, Prism, and Cortex, which is I guess like Nethermind's project on building a consensus client. Then kind of the second layer of like what's important to actually use the Ethereum, like what is it, what allows you to actually build applications on top of the stack is the languages and contracts. So you have the Solidity team, you have the formal verification guys that have a talk in the room next to us. You have other languages like Fe, like Socrates, maybe Circum. Like these are, I don't want to say they're not as important, but they're definitely more on the outskirts. So again, predominantly people will be using Solidity. But you have also like IDEs, like the development environments and that kind of stuff, which is also kind of necessary for the ecosystem to actually work. Then you have like research and governance buckets. This is like what I'm the least sure, to be honest, in the numbers that I'm going to talk about. But you have some like core development of E2, just like figuring out the way forward, focusing on the merge and so on. You have a whole bunch of L2s, and this like L2s are just a box of its own. You have the ZKP research, you have statelessness, kind of relates to core development, but you also have like kind of like these governance mechanics like EIP process and doing the reviews, doing audits of these EIPs, which also is important. We probably couldn't survive without that. And then finally, you have the tooling that's kind of like connected to especially the mainnet and languages stuff, where do you have like basically, well, you have kind of tooling like for every ecosystem or like developer ecosystem, but let's focus on the dominant ones, which is like JavaScript ecosystem and Python one. And then you have like a whole bunch of other dev tools like Hardhat and Truffle and like Ganache and these kind of things that allow you to like test the contracts before you actually deploy them. So, all right, that's quite a lot of people. quite a lot of teams out there. So how much money do we actually need to make sure that like these folks can just work and don't have to worry about anything? Thanks. So this is my like estimate based on kind of like working with some of these teams. I'm least sure on the research and governance side. There's probably like much more money being spent on these topics as well. But I would argue this is kind of the safe baseline. So basically on the execution layer side, you have like 1 million per client. Same with consensus layer. I'm using some like buffers, because there's always stuff that I don't know about. Kind of on the language and contract side, you have fairly large team on Solidity. You have like some new languages popping up, which are much smaller. There is like a whole team working on IDEs, remix, and that kind of stuff. So these are like annual numbers. Again, a buffer on the research side. Well, that's like a bottomless pit. Like you can throw like as much money into research as you want, I guess. It all then comes down to actually finding people that can do it. But I think the appetite for just funding research in general is pretty high. So yeah, ballpark numbers. Let's say like the research team is going to be like in total roughly the same size as the client developer team. So it's like 5 mil for core development. L2s, the number in L2s will probably be like 5 times as high as this. But again, let's just focus on the baseline. ZKP is the same case. There's probably much more money being spent on that. Statelessness is like, as far as I can see, there's not really like as much focus on statelessness in terms of funding, at least. EIPs, similar story, but I guess like it's enough for the mechanism to work. And on the tooling side, it's again like relatively small numbers compared to like the client development. But again, let's just focus on a baseline, basically like having a team being funded for a year to work on a topic. So all in all, I would argue that there's roughly like $42.8 million needed like yearly to secure all of this. Obviously, a huge chunk of that is the like the research side, which again is a bottomless pit. So we don't even have to like consider that. But yeah, let's say to be safe, we need like $50 million yearly to just secure the very like baseline setup of teams to be working. If I quickly go back, there is like a whole bunch of things that I didn't consider. And obviously these things are super important for the ecosystem. There's the entire like wallet ecosystem actually allowing like end users to use whatever we build, which I didn't consider in the funding because I don't have insight into that all that much. The entire application layer, useful stuff as like ENS, as like proxy contracts and that kind of stuff, also not considered. We wouldn't be here without event organizers and just like people that are doing education in the space. Also super important, but also like super like wide in terms of like what can be considered there, and it's hard to assess like what the baseline is. And then the legal operations costs. I didn't consider like in the large client teams they have like other folks working on a team. Probably their view of like how much we actually have to spend on a team is like goes beyond the number. But again, I'm trying to focus on like developers, maybe some support staff, but not really thinking about like marketing teams and like HR and sales and whatnot. So yeah, so we are at 50 million. That's a lot of money, but well, there's like $6 billion sitting in treasury. So it's probably, well, we could say, well, even if you just take the ballpark number and we say like we spend 50 million from that like each year, yeah, it sounds like we're probably safe. But yeah, that's not happening really, is it? So, so yeah, like one way to, one direction of thinking would be how can we like unlock those treasuries, but that's also just like a one-off solution to a problem that will just remain. So let's try to focus on different things. Let's try to focus on like how much the projects that are kind of like closely bound to Ethereum on the base layer, on the base layer that actually like make a business model and revenue on top of Ethereum. Like what's kind of the fees that these projects generate, and if we can actually like live from that, or if the baseline can live from that. So again, pulling data from cryptofees.info, there is This is just like a filter of fees generated by Ethereum and a whole bunch of dApps deployed on Ethereum. These are, again, like 2 days old numbers. What I did, basically just took the average and said, well, yeah, we are not in a like overhyped bull market these days. The activity on the network is like mediocre. So yeah, I did the easy and lazy thing and just said, well, all right, if we take the average and just say, well, you know, what if this was the case for the entire year? Like during the bull market, these numbers were much higher. Now let's hope those, you know, those won't fall anywhere below like the today's numbers. So all in all, if we exclude Ethereum as such, like the mining fees, the validator fees, if we exclude like yield farming and kind of the token incentives, if we exclude kind of the off-chain stuff, the off-chain fees like software as a service, like consultant fees, like software development houses, and like these companies that obviously also have a huge incentive to participate in the ecosystem and to like fund development and have their own teams working on the core layer stuff. And there's like, luckily there's a lot of these companies. Then we just really focus on what actually happens on chain. And there's also the number I'm going to show you also doesn't take into account like exchanges and the trading fees, which is also like a huge part. And yeah, I mean there's like an untapped potential there. So yeah, all in all, excluding all of that other stuff, yeah, there is still like $1.6 billion like basically generated on top of Ethereum every year. And yeah, it's, I mean, the filter of those 15 projects, so probably the number might be much higher as well. So yeah, so yeah, what if we like just said, all right, so with all of these fees, are we able to like sustainably fund development of the base layer? Well, yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's like 3% of the fees that are being accumulated on top of the stack. So my argument is, yeah, I mean, if we want it, the ecosystem already now could be pretty much self-sufficient. Obviously, there is like tremendous potential of like the other things that can be funded, and like there's no doubt that much more than $50 million can be deployed in the ecosystem to let it grow, to let it flourish on like the different layers. But already now there is a chance to like stop relying just on the big treasuries like EF, like Uniswap, and just like proactively fund the core work with a relatively like small cost or compared to like what these projects actually generate. So so yeah. Kind of what I think will be necessary to happen in the ecosystem in the following years is that some like DAOs and projects that like generate a lot of fees, they will eventually like start supporting the individual teams or like classes in the ecosystem, like the client teams or tooling. And it seems like even if the large grants entities like EF or even Uniswap like disappear, the likelihood of the ecosystem being able to like find the money to actually fund itself is quite large, because there is quite a lot of space. So I hope this will like end on a positive note. It's not just like a general like governance talk. But yeah, I think that was pretty much on time. That was it. Thanks for listening. And does anyone have any questions?
So do you think there will have to be like proactive, almost like a business development, reaching out to all those projects and sort of almost asking them to contribute? Or do you think the natural evolution is going to be that, they will just show up?
Yeah, I think luckily we are in the ecosystem where people generally like feel it's beneficial for everybody if they kind of contribute back. So there were people in the past, and there are kind of like new people like showing up to fund the ecosystem. I mean, like you have things like Gitcoin, right, that work pretty well, but they don't get to these numbers yet. And these are like, Gitcoin is like primarily like ecosystem run thing where just recently you started seeing kind of participation from like larger treasuries, I don't know, like Kraken and so on, in Gitcoin runs. But otherwise, that was just like individuals funding, like other individuals. Now you can see like, you know, especially I guess the large DAOs kind of, or people from those DAOs showing up with proposals to fund core development. You had like the Uniswap proposal to fund Get. You have like many more people in the space that are kind of like willing to spearhead some of the DAO proposals to get commitments in these treasuries. I mean, from the conversations that I had, at least, I think there is an appetite to do that, and yeah, luckily people feel like it's the way to go. So I'm very hopeful this will happen like more or less organically. If we look back at numbers, I think we, you know, there's no rush. Like, we don't have to be stressed about it. But eventually, I think this is something we should kind of strive for. Eventually, I think this is something what will happen, because you know, the large treasuries like may be here for ages, and obviously like we may be lucky and like the number can go up only, but yeah, we shouldn't rely on that, and luckily it seems like we won't have to. Cool. So that is it.